And I'm back. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of Freedom Alternative Interviews. It's been a tremendous amount of work to get this thing working. But I'm finally here with Andrea Hardie, formerly known as Janet Bloomfield or as JudgyBitch. I still have a very, very high problem with calling her Andrea. She's still Janet for me. Anyway, Janet has been a long-time advocate against feminism on her blog, JudgyBitch.com, and it all went upwards from there. Her work has been featured on Thought Catalog, A Voice for Men, and The Examiner, and she was interviewed during these years by outlets such as the BBC and Vice. She's also the author of 2 books, fictional novel The Fitness Test, and her latest book, FeminISN'T. Andrea still professes the belief in the radical notion that women are adults, which one would think is pretty sensible, yet most people seem to disagree. So, Miss Hardie, Andrea, welcome to the Freedom Alternative Interviews.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very pleased to be here.
Yeah, we've been working to have this interview for what, 3 weeks now? Something like that. Something like that. Okay, so let's stop wasting time. Let's get to business. First of all, for the audience, for the portion of the audience that doesn't know you, and yes, there is such thing, tell us a thing or two about yourself. How did the JudgyBitch persona started? What were the reasons that you thought it was necessary to come out against the sisterhood when you did so back in 2012, I think, when you started JudgyBitch.com?
Yeah, well, I actually took a women's studies degree by stealth. It was called film theory. So they don't tell you that you're going to be studying all of this through the lens of gender theory, through feminist theory, but you end up doing that. So I was always a little bit twitchy about it, but I spent 4 years reading women's studies. It really didn't come home to me, and I think this is true for many women. It's not something I'm proud of. I still think it's true. Issues that affect men and boys didn't come home to me. I didn't really care about them until I had a son. And that's sort of what prompted me to start looking around and exploring the gender issues from the perspective of men and boys. You would think that I might just care about those universally. Why do we care about men's rights? Because men are human, and what other reason do you need? Unfortunately, I think for a lot of women, until it becomes personal, until it becomes something that hits them right in the heart, they just don't care. And I was one of them. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true.
Well, no need to be sorry. One of the upcoming videos this Sunday is about the psychology of former leftists. The same goes with the other left-wing cults, actually. Until it hits personally, most people don't leave the big tent of collectivist thinking and gynocentric thinking.
That's been my experience for sure, but I've had my son for 10 years now. So I ended up starting the blog in 2012 because my very dear friend of mine had a baby who was born critically ill, and she noted right from the beginning of his care, he had surgery within hours of being born. And she noticed right from the beginning that nurses, without seeming to be conscious of it, treated the little girls with more kindness and more tenderness and more gentleness than her son. And that sort of, again, it became deeply personal for her, right? And at one point he was taken into surgery, and they didn't think he was going to survive. And a very social worker at the hospital suggested that she write his obituary. And I thought that was horrifying, an absolutely horrifying thing to do. And I said, no, get out your computer. We're going to create a blog. So she did all the technical work. She did all the back end stuff. And we started writing. We really didn't think anyone would be reading. If you go back to the very earliest posts that I made, they do seem like letters to my friend, right? Just kind of silly and off the top of my head, because that's what they were. But the blog took off very quickly. We had an extraordinary audience. I think people are just so hungry to hear someone stand up and say no to these crazy feminist bullies, and to say, wait a second, gender doesn't tell you anything about oppression. That's ridiculous. I am an affluent white woman living in the West. I am not oppressed in any way.
Yeah, and especially in 2012, when there were still very few outlets saying no to feminism. I mean, let's remember what was then. It was A Voice for Men. It was The Spearhead was still around. It was the Anti-Masonry Forum, and that's pretty much it. And a few channels on YouTube.
That's right. That's all there really was. I mean, none of the other voices were out there being amplified yet. So yeah, Dull Rock, A Voice for Men, Spearhead. I guess, was Roosh even around then? I
Yeah,
didn't come to
yeah,
it.
but he was still focused on PUA stuff and less on
Yeah.
overall social views and whatnot. But still, I mean, very few overtly non-feminist or overtly anti-feminist voices were around. I mean, when I see 17, 18, there's literally 16, 17-year-old kids watching now and say, "Oh my God, your content is so new." And I was like, "Well, if this is new, you should have been around when we were all in the trenches, just a few of us with the two blogs," and that was pretty much it. Um, with regards to this treatment of a better treatment of girls and boys, I think some of it is biological. I mean, we do tend to treat women slightly better, but I don't think it has always been like that. I mean, I asked about this thing when a friend of mine told me that the the hospital didn't allow him to assist while his wife was giving birth to their son. And I was like, well, this is insane. Has it always been the case? And I asked my grandmother, was it the case grandpa wasn't allowed to see when you're giving birth? And I was like, no, absolutely, it was allowed. And things have changed dramatically lately. That is a social construct. I mean, whilst we do treat baby girls slightly better, and we have always done so, it wasn't always that bad.
No, I don't think so. And I really question if we've always treated little girls with more tenderness at when transfer of property happened principally through the eldest male. You would think that the baby boys would have been given the best care. So there's definitely a social construct. Biologically, instinctively, I didn't feel that I had any in terms of a personal relationship with each of my children. I had two girls and a boy. I didn't feel anything different. Like, there wasn't any instinct that, oh, the little girl is more precious. They were all absolutely precious equally. So that's a social construct that comes from the broader culture that now, in a former time, the boys were more important because property transfer happened through them. We've now flipped where girls are more important, even though they don't contribute anything really.
Yeah, well, in China, for instance, there is the cultural preference for boys, and when feminists look at that, they say, "Oh my God, girls are being oppressed there." When in reality, the parents tend to favor sons over daughters and treat sons slightly better because they want their sons to grow up to take care of them. It's selfish incentive there,
Oh,
and
it's more than that. It's more than that. The boys are legally required to care for their parents. They have to. Girls are legally required to care for their husband's parents. So
No,
you
not in
see,
China. No, that's not the case in China. It's a cultural requirement. It hasn't been a legal requirement for quite some time.
no, it is. It is. You're mistaken. I'll give you the link. But yes, your children could be fined for not taking care of parents.
that's true, but it's not the
Parents are
husband.
defined.
Yeah, yeah,
Once you're married, your parents become your husband's parents, not your parents. That's why you see the preference for males is really only amongst the economically vulnerable. That's where you see a lot of the babies being aborted, a lot of babies being abandoned, sent to orphanages. It's only amongst the very, very poor. The rich actually have a preference for daughters. First of all, because they can nation build through marriages, right? Build dynasties. And second of all, because girls do tend to want to live near their own parents and involve their own parents in their own lives.
yeah. Feminism. I've been saying it multiple
It's
times.
not misogyny is the point. China doesn't treat girls that way because China hates girls. There are real, valid, rational reasons for why they do what they do.
Yes, and feminism and generally collectivism is a luxury problem. I mean, where do you see the highest amount of feminists? You don't see them in Congo, because in Congo they're busy, gathering food. The highest amount of feminists per capita, you see them in Sweden. You see them in Canada, which I call it the bigger Sweden. I mean, that's where you see the highest amount of feminists and the highest amount of collectivists, because it's a luxury problem. And speaking of collectivism, you started off much further to the left, and you slowly moved towards a more conservative way of looking at the world. I wouldn't call you a right-winger, but you did move towards a more conservative way of looking at the world. How did this happen? Can you expand a bit on that transition?
Well, I think a lot of it has been reactionary, that the more that the left moves towards collectivism and demanding that all men support all women with no obligations on women's part, the more I started to push back against that. I mean, in 2012, you also wouldn't have had feminists saying, I want, free tampons, give your money to women. I want, an app that divides up restaurant bills according to this imaginary
That started
wage
off
gap.
as a joke, and it was taken seriously. That was amazing. That particular app started out as a joke. It was on a satire festival, and it was taken seriously by the leftists. Amazing.
Incredible. And I think my move towards the right, I would say that I haven't moved. Everyone else has just gone so far to the left that I now appear to be part of the right, just because they've gotten so fucking crazy. And there doesn't seem to be any end to it. I mean, now we have Bernie Sanders. I mean, the American election, this is one of the most exciting elections that I have ever, it's never happened during my lifetime for sure. And it's just amazing to see what's happening. This is a huge, huge backlash against how crazy the left has gotten. And I think people are, they're mystified by the fact that the left dominates the media. So they seem like a really huge group. They're not. They're just really fucking noisy. And America's going to find out at the ballot box just how few crazy left-wingers there are. I seriously hope the candidate is Hillary Clinton, because Bernie Sanders supporters are all going to have a tantrum and stay home with their Play-Doh and their puppy videos, and Trump is just gonna sweep.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a lot about Trump, but meanwhile, they already found out at the ballot box. I mean, with all those huge crowds that Bolshevik Sanders has attracted, it hasn't translated into actual votes. I mean, there was a district, I don't remember the name of the district, it was in New Hampshire. He gathered 10,000 people, all of them living in that particular area, and yet he gathered like 1,000 votes, tops, even though all of them seemed to be enthusiastic. And the explanation is not that those people were put off by his views, it's that those people didn't then bother to just, leave their homes and go to the polling station and cast their vote.
And that's the left in a nutshell, isn't it? It's always someone else's responsibility to do this. We need to get Bernie Sanders elected, and by we, I mean you, not me. Someone else needs to do this.
Someone else has to do that. Yeah, heaven forbid I take some personal responsibility for myself. We'll get back to Trump and American elections, and it's going to be a blast. But you recently pissed off a lot of people by coming out against women's suffrage. And you launched a hashtag, why women should not vote. Now, I'll link in the low bar after we're done this with your entire video. But can you please give to my audience a shorter version of your case against women's suffrage?
The very shortest case against women's suffrage is that women aren't drafted and women don't die in wars. And wars are the ultimate expression of leadership. And if it's not your blood, you don't get a say. You don't get to send other people to die if you're not going to be one of them. And a lot of people will say, oh, but not all men get drafted. Well, I'm sorry, but at some point, every single man in the US, and quite frankly, everywhere, the US may have a formal draft. The draft exists everywhere. Wars are fought by men. They're fought by men, not women. And therefore, I think that women really shouldn't have a say. The second big reason is that they're collectivists. They vote as if the entire country is a family. It's not a family. Inviting strangers in for tea and making sure that everyone shares and that everyone has, exactly what they need according to their needs. That's a great way to handle a family with small children. That is a fucking disaster when it comes to running a country. Now, I think there's a block of women who are sane, who are rational. We're wildly outnumbered by the crazy collectivists who genuinely think stuff is free. They really think stuff is free. Nothing is fucking free. And ultimately, it has to be backed up with violence. That's also why I make the exception that any woman with combat experience, that comes with the right to vote. And I also think any woman elected to a position of leadership twice has earned the right to vote. She's demonstrated that she understands what it takes to lead whatever, a mayor, a town, a country, a school board. I don't care. If men have elected you twice, and of course, this is particularly hilarious in the United States, saying if you take away women's vote, you take away their voice. Well, no, you don't. Feminist historians have done
women have been elected to a public office even before women's suffrage.
Absolutely. Victoria Woodhull ran for president in 1873 against Ulysses S. Grant. But feminist historians have done a fantastic job documenting how absolutely essential women were to the, not suffrage, the abolitionist movement, and that's the ending of slavery, and the prohibition movement, which was the complete prohibition of alcohol. That led to the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution being passed, and the 18th. If women need the vote to have a voice, how did the 13th and the 18th pass before the 19th?
Oh, and if women need a vote to have a voice, then how did the social temperance movement came to fruition, which raised the, not just prohibited alcohol, but also introduced a lot of regulations on bars, raised the regulations against pornography, raised regulations, made absurdly high age of consent to such an extent that a 19-year-old boy having sex with his 17-year-old boyfriend is rape. That's all the result of the social temperance movement, which was an alliance between traditionally conservative women and feminist women.
Yeah, I mean, they don't need the vote to enact some very, very dramatic social change. What are women doing with the vote right now in Europe? They're voting to turn your countries into radical Islam. They're voting their rapists in. These women need to be stopped. I don't see any solution to the refugee crisis in Europe except a 10-year moratorium on women voting. They have created this huge fucking mess. They need men to fix it. Ultimately, men are going to have to fix it. We don't want it to get to the point of it being blood. You need a 10-year moratorium. No women vote in any elections in Europe for 10 years until the men have gotten together and figured out how to deal with fucking maniacs. Women cannot assess risk. They can't. They've proven it. And they'll just vote to spend until the state absolutely collapses. Women shouldn't vote. They should not vote, with the exceptions that I have noted.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked you this is because I'm also a guy who doesn't believe fundamentally in democracy. In fact, I have a video upcoming why democracy is essentially bad. And especially, I mean, if we are to have democracy, we should definitely not have universal suffrage, precisely because the unproductive tend to outvote the productive, and as you said, grow the government way beyond what's needed to maintain a civilization. But wouldn't a more economics-based model be more sensible rather than sex-based? I mean, economically productive women and maybe should vote, and economically unproductive men should not vote?
Well, sure, okay, as long as we're going to run the draft the same way, that the economically unproductive are the cannon fodder.
That's a very hard line approach, don't you think?
Well, good luck selling that. I mean, if you're going to base suffrage on economic productivity, then you have to base the draft on that too. Because from my perspective, it comes down to blood. The only truth in life is violence. Everything you have is protected with violence. If you're not carrying out that violence, you don't get a say in how and when it is deployed.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, both here in Europe and in North America, a significant chunk of people no longer get that. I mean, they think that just because there are some words on the paper, oh my God, that's the law, we have to obey. No, that's not how it works. A law is a political opinion supported by violence, by the barrel of a gun.
Absolutely. And people on the left are saying things like, if we just defund the military, then we won't have war.
Yeah, that's particularly insane. I mean, there was no military funding when the barbarians invaded Europe last time, or the.
What, you mean like last Thursday?
No. I mean, let's say in the 1600s or in 300 AD. I mean, there have been many other barbarian invasions into Europe, and the concept of military funding didn't actually exist at the time, especially in 300 AD. So, I mean, the idea that there would be no wars if there is no funding for the military is just is devoid from reality.
It's preposterous, and yet these people can vote. And who are these people? For the most part, they are women or extremely feminized men who have been raised by women, mostly single mothers, I would guess, or having men who have been raised without a significant amount of contact with their fathers, men, and male culture.
Yeah, with this one with single mothers, it is indeed true. I mean, I have met only one leftist so far, face to face, who has had a functional family. Other than that particular exception, all the other leftists I met either were raised by single mothers or had a highly dysfunctional family.
Yeah, and ultimately it doesn't matter, because those men are going to get drafted anyway. They will be the first to die because they're pussies who have no idea what they're doing, but they're still going to get drafted. Those men should still have the right to vote. If they're going to vote to send themselves to war, let them do so. It's still their blood. They get to choose, and they will pay the ultimate price for their leadership choices. That is true in every single Western nation in the world. I mean, Norway has made a big show of instituting the draft for women. Well, they're being drafted into holding the clipboard in the supply warehouse while the men actually do the fighting. That's actually the reality in Israel too. Sure, yes, women have mandatory military service. They are not serving in frontline combat units.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends in the IDF, and around 3% tops of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces that actually do the fighting, are women. And of those 3%, half of them don't see a front line ever. So only 1.5% actually do see some actual combat.
Right, and yet those women are still, I can make sort of an exception in the case of Israel because it's such a small, confined country with a very unique set of adversaries. So I would say that women's blood is on the line simply because, one or two nukes there is going to blow everyone up. So it kind of is their blood on the line. But it's only blood that, for me, that would justify Israeli women being able to vote.
Yeah, well, it's also the fact that Israel is in a hybrid war. I mean, it's not just physical, classical war as we know it. There's also the information war, and there's also the guerrilla war. I mean, you have almost daily, stabbing attacks and things of that nature. This kind of petty guerrilla terrorism that's going on.
Well, they're not stabbing attacks. These Israelis keep running into Palestinians who are just innocently standing there holding their knives.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, since you brought up Trump a little bit earlier, let's talk politics, not theory politics, but partisan politics. You came out in support of Donald Trump. I have to admit I wasn't surprised, but most people were. So, has this shocked your followers? And, how did your audience react to that? And also, why Donald Trump?
I called Donald Trump from almost day one. As soon as he announced his presidency, I knew he was going to take it because he has all of the qualities of leadership that Americans in particular like, that he's called a populist. And I actually think, I'm sorry to insult you, dear Yankees, but I think when Americans hear populist, they think it means popular. And when they hear socialist, they think it means cares about social issues. So you've got this profound lack of understanding about what populism and what socialism actually is. And just we're so close to America, right? That we have to be very familiar with their character and note the differences between us. And I just knew that populism in America was going to win out over socialism, and no one does populism better than Donald Trump. And populism, the definition I'm using, is that the people feel that they're getting screwed over, and they want a voice in government to represent their anger. That's different from saying these are angry people who just want to get in there and scream and kill and have a tantrum. That's not exactly what populism is. Populism is people feeling like no one is listening to them, and they're angry that no one is listening to them. They want someone at the highest level of government to represent their interests. No one is going to do that better than Donald Trump. And from the very beginning, people were saying, he's a reality TV star. I'm like, yes, that's why it's going to work. That's what's so brilliant about Donald Trump. He's taking this entire generation of docile Americans who haven't traditionally participated in the election process. He's taking their attention away from the Kardashians and whatever stupidity they're up to in their reality TV show, and he's shifting it into actual reality. the reality of American politics, the reality of governance. I think that is a fantastic thing for him to be doing. He is engaging people who never gave a shit about politics before. And I'm very interested to see what you have to say about democracy, but that's absolutely fundamental to democracy. You can't have people sitting out. The US hasn't had participation rates above 60% since the 1960s in their elections. I think Trump, I wouldn't be surprised to see 70% participation rates, especially if Bernie Sanders is the candidate.
Yeah, well, 70% of the registered voters, because in the US you have to register yourself to be allowed to vote, whereas in Europe everyone is automatically registered once they turn 18. So that particular number may be actually even lower. I mean, even in the 60s, yes, they had 62-63% participation rate, but that actually meant something like 35% of the total voting age population. So America has always been a country with only a minority of the population being interested in government, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is a fact. And even the Constitution itself was written to be that way. I mean, America is not a democracy; it's a republic. The president is not directly elected; it's elected through the Electoral College. Just because you get the most votes nationally doesn't mean you end up president. You sometimes don't.
Yeah, that's true. I like the constitutional republic. We have a constitutional monarchy in Canada, of course, so we avoid the problems of having a president and the necessity for executive power because we have this figurehead. So that takes a lot of that out. However, we have
doubt about that. We'll get to speak about Canada soon, but I somehow doubt. I don't think you're correct there. I mean, what can Queen Elizabeth do to?
She can't do anything, but she's the figurehead. So she does. She technically is our leader.
Yes.
Yeah, but we actually elect our leader directly through the democratic process. We don't have an electoral college that if you get the most votes, you end up being the prime minister. The parties themselves elect their leader, and then we vote for our representatives according to parties, and then that person becomes the leader. So they are elected. I guess it's a little bit complicated. We have the first past the post party system. So we have Justin Trudeau, who actually only 30% of Canada wanted as prime minister. 30%, mostly middle-aged, horny housewives, elected him. That was the basis of the vote there.
Yeah,
and so democracy has so many problems, but who is it that said it's the worst system you can have except for all the others?
Yeah, well, but on the other hand, Churchill said my favorite quote: a 5-minute conversation with your average voter kills any excitement of democracy ever. And that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. We'll get to speak about Justin Trudeau, but you said that Donald Trump is going to ride this wave of populist, and he's going to do stuff. I'm not that convinced. What I do think is that indeed he took this thing. Look, we're done with this bullshit. I'm sick and tired of your political correctness. What, CNN said something bad about me? Who gives a shit? What, Al Jazeera asking inconvenient questions? You guys are out of business. Get the fuck out. That kind of gestures definitely does win him a lot of support because, in just 3 seconds, he disarmed the media. because he's not a politician, and politicians genuinely think, or at least profess to think, that when the media asks them questions, that's the representatives of the American people. Whereas that's not real. That it's not true. Most of the media outlets are really quite insulated from the actual perceptions and the actual beliefs of the American people. I mean, who believes that Huffington Post represents the totality of the American people? Come on. or MSNBC for that matter. I mean, the reason I was reading a comment section, I think it was on Salon or some other leftist hellhole. They were like, I can't believe that Fox News is the most popular and has the highest audiences in the country. And I was like, well, maybe because Fox News actually brings actual leftists and actual rightists to talk to each other rather than the echo chambers of the MSNBC.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Fox News represents America in much much more fairly and much more accurately than any of the left-wing media. The left-wing media is trying to tell America what to think. And, you know, you're just going to get their backs up right away. You do not tell that. That's the American. If you could sum up Americans in one phrase, it would be ask them any question and the answer is because fuck you. That's why. That's America. And in some ways that's horrible, and in many ways that's absolutely fucking fantastic. You push them and they are going to push back because they don't even need a reason, because fuck you. That's why.
Yeah, because don't tread on me, because that's my property, and I'll do what I want, and you do what you want on your property, and now you can kindly go fuck yourself. Yeah, and that's a very good mentality. It's the kind of mentality that I apply, even though I don't have any sort of American background. But Donald Trump, on the other hand, he seems not to be harmed of any what we would call political mistakes. I mean, when say, well, I want to punch that guy in the face. These things like this used to harm politicians in the past, but for some reason it doesn't work on him. Why do you think is that case?
Because the fact that he's willing to say that is the majority of his appeal, combined with his focus on trade, on jobs, on manufacturing. Even though I think the majority of Americans don't understand what he's talking about when he discusses things like fair trade deals, they understand that that's the issue. There's this huge group of voters in America that sociologists refer to as MARS, Middle American Radicals. And these are people who hate both the rich and the poor. They don't vote because they figure if you vote Democrat, you're just going to take my money and give it to poor, lazy fucks who don't deserve it. On the other hand, if I vote Republican, all they're going to do is take my money and give it to rich assholes who also don't deserve it. What Donald Trump is coming in and saying to these people is, we're not going to do either of those things. I'm completely different. I am going to focus on making everybody rich. In his speech at Mar-a-Lago after he won Florida, said something very interesting. So I'm going to make America rich again, and you can't have the great without the rich.
Yes.
So I think that's interesting. That is the American dream. The American dream is that everyone has the opportunity to get rich. You're going to be able to keep your riches, but we don't want to see this 1% class that's getting bailouts and getting massive amounts of corporate welfare. And these middle American radicals hate welfare on the low end and the high end. And Trump seems to be the only one who's really channeling that. He's the only one that's really addressing this fundamental concern. It's like, I'm going to make rich, give you the opportunity to pursue the American dream again. And I think that's, he is just an American. He understands the people in a way that no other politician does. And you know what? I think that comes from his business, right? If you're running big real estate companies and you're building things from the ground up, you better be able to speak to your HVAC guys. You better be able to speak to your construction crews. You need to get out on the site and be able to communicate. You got to talk to unions. You've got to talk to the maids. You've got to talk to everyone. So Donald Trump has never been able to isolate himself just in this little echo chamber of rich people, right? He doesn't spend all his time at the golf club. He also goes down into the boiler room to see what the hell's going on, why the sprinklers aren't working. So he's genuine. He can genuinely connect to every single person up the chain of a functioning business. And I actually think he's going to be able to do some pretty amazing things. I think he's going to be able to do fantastic things in government that no one's been able to do before, because he does know how to unify. The only people who are hysterical at the idea of Donald Trump are the left, because they know, they're going to scream, they're going to have tantrums. He's going to say, get the fuck out of here. Shut up, get out.
Yeah, the left and the establishment GOP. I mean, although in some ways I would count that as the left as well. I mean, it recently came out that John Kasich is getting funding from George Soros, for crying out loud. I mean, you can't get more far left than getting funds from George Soros. It's just really the epitome of far left activism. But let me put it this way to you. I don't share your enthusiasm for Donald Trump. I do understand why he's appealing. He's a big businessman. He's for many, especially for the lower educated voting bloc, is the epitome of American success and whatnot. Whether that's the case or not is irrelevant at this point, because it's also a personality context. The personality that you get to project there, that's what is going to win or lose votes. But on the other hand, when Donald Trump is polled against Hillary Clinton in national polls, it doesn't seem to be winning, not yet anyway. What would it take for that to change?
I think the herd instinct to kick in. That look at what happened with Bernie Sanders in Michigan. That Hillary had polled ahead of him over and over again. Every single poll, she was just showing massive, massive leads over Sanders. And then every single one was dead wrong. Sanders just took it. And I was reading a lot of the analysis, like what happened with these polls? Well, nothing happened with the polls. What happened is that people went to the polling stations, they talked to each other. The sense that you're voting for Bernie, you're voting for Bernie, I guess I'm going to vote for Bernie too. It's people's willingness to question their dedication and to just follow the herd. That instinct. That's why we need leaders, right? Because people do have that herd instinct. So I think when we get to polling stations and people are just milling around and just talking, who are you voting for? Who you're voting for? The more vocal the Trump supporters are. And of course, the protesters are fantastic. I fucking love them. Black Lives Matter protesters. Every single time they open their mouths, they get Donald Trump another 100 votes. They get another 100 people registered to vote. They are great for him. They are going to put him in the office too. The bigger assholes they are, the more people vote for Trump. And that's why? Because fuck you. That's why. Because you told me not to. So absolutely. I'm going to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not a Trump supporter at all, but I made a video exactly that. And I said, look, the more you protest this guy, the more likely it is he'll win. I mean, you go there and try and actually succeed to shut down his rally. And then you march on the stage to say, oh my God, we stopped Trump and whatnot. That's going to raise a very high amount of anger amongst the common folk and say, wait a minute, no matter what you think about Trump, he has the right to say whatever he damn pleases on his legitimate property or legitimately rented property and whatnot. He has a First Amendment right as well. And these fucking lunatics there are infringing upon his right. And a lot of people, especially in Illinois, I think they voted for Trump out of spite. Out of like, yeah, the Black Lives Matter wants to play that way. All right, we'll vote for Donald Trump. Now what?
Yeah, that's how he's going to win. And the left characterizes that as, oh, voters are voting out of racism. They just hate black people. No, they hate anyone trying to tell them what they need to care about and how they're going to do that and who they're allowed to vote for. It wouldn't matter if it was Polish Lives Matter or, it doesn't matter who it is. Irish Lives Matter. On today, the day of cultural appropriation, that apparently is fine. The only day of cultural appropriation that's fine with the left. I guess because it involves them getting
what drunk. I don't understand, and that's why I don't align again, I'm not a supporter of Trump, but I can't really get to align myself with most of the Trump critics because they criticize him for the wrong reasons. I mean, I think that what he proposes as an economic policy on trade is particularly disastrous. It's not capitalist at all, and it's not going to make everyone richer. In fact, it's going to make most people worse off. That's a legitimate criticism because you can have numbers, economics, policies, you can talk about it. But when the left comes in, oh my God, Trump is racist. Well, if he's so fucking racist, why does he poll better with black people than Hillary? And definitely better than Sanders.
Yeah, they're not willing to actually address the issues. And I think this is just a dearth of knowledge on their part. They can't address. Okay, he's talking about adding tariffs onto imported products. Now, if you are a fundamentalist free trader, you don't believe in adding, it's protectionism. I'm not opposed to protectionism when it comes to building and creating industrial sectors. There's no big pharma and there is no heavy aerospace manufacturing that didn't happen without a significant element of protectionism. And of course, I am very much for agricultural protectionism. I think it's crazy to give over your basic ability to feed yourself to any other nation. That's insane. You don't do that.
That's what New Zealand did, and now they have a far better agricultural output than France ever had, and France is the epitome of agricultural protectionism. I mean, right, New Zealand produces more food per capita than France, even though it has 10% of France's agricultural land.
That's not what TPP wants to do. Yes, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with foreign ownership of domestically owned production facilities, because if the foreign ownership goes bad, you still have the food. The problem is saying we're going to trust China to grow the grains we need for basic survival in Africa, and they'll send them to us. No, that's crazy. You don't do that. You need to have the domestic means of food production. You can't give that up, or you're in an intensely vulnerable situation. So TPP is not approaching the agricultural industry in a way that's sane. And I think your average left-wing reporter with their gender studies degree and you know, an additional certificate in propaganda isn't able to have those conversations. I've been extremely alarmed over the past. There has been a leadership change at The Economist. A longtime reader of The Economist. I like them. I don't agree with everything that they write. I think they're a little bit too naive when it comes to the intentions of certain countries around the world. But they have just gone full left-wing social justice warrior. It's just
absolutely
extraordinary.
Yeah, I canceled my Economist subscription this January for the exact same reason. Yes.
Yeah, they've gone utterly left-wing on certain social issues, while they're still towing a really hard line on a lot of economic issues. So it's very confusing. I don't actually have a replacement source for good reading on the global economy. I'm still sort of just trying to stumble through The Economist and take what I can from it. But I think most people can't. Your average person in America, and definitely your average reporter on the left, can't have a discussion about protectionism. They can't have a discussion about the use of tariffs. Are they always bad? I am not going to say that they're always bad. Now, certainly they're going to raise the domestic price of products. So do we really need to have $5 t-shirts? And do we need 40 of them?
Yes, absolutely we do.
No.
And not only that, but you know, imposing tariffs is doing to yourself what you do to the enemies in times of war. I mean, for instance, Iran had tariffs on all exports to everywhere because everyone else was in economic war with them. Well, almost everyone else. So, you know, doing to them in times of war, you're saying, okay, tariffs on Iran are bad because we're no longer in economic war with them. Fine. And then, oh, but let's take those tariffs and apply it to ourselves. That's masochism. It really is.
No, I don't think so. I think this is Henry Ford. You go all the way back to Henry Ford. It's like, why do you pay your workers 3 times the average wage that you could get away with? Well, because then they can buy the cars. Tariffs also work to create the domestic market. So
yeah, well,
I think
that's the thing. I believe in people like Henry Ford. They're right to do that, but I don't think the state should force everyone to do that. I mean, if people are willing to work for me for, I don't know, $3 a day, it's none of your business. It's
right,
not.
but if you're going to have people working for you for $3 a day, you better price your product at a rate that they can afford, or you don't have any customers. Now, he's talking about manufacturing, like Carrier, for example. They make the air conditioning units. It's like, okay, if you go to Mexico, we are going to charge you a 35% tariff to sell your air conditioning units in the US. You won't be competitive. You aren't going to sell anything. As a result, they are going to keep their manufacturing facilities here. Now, this is a temporary measure. You keep those manufacturing facilities here, and you're paying living wages so that people can actually buy those air conditioning units. What I
really hope we don't get to see
exit strategy. I want to hear his exit strategy for getting out of tariffs.
I don't think I really hope we don't get to see your economic view put in practice, because that's an absolute disaster. Here's another example. In my country, after communism had fallen, they were like this thing, oh my God, everyone is going to buy more foreign cars, and they will not going to buy those on the domestic market. And yes, they were right. Everyone wanted them foreign cars produced not in Eastern Germany or in Poland, but in Western Germany and in France, because they were better than the communist ones. And
Absolutely, but we're talking about where they're being
and they
manufactured.
introduced, no, let me finish. They introduced tariffs after communism had fallen in order to, quote unquote, protect the industry and incentivize people to buy locally produced cars. You know what happened? The local plants went almost bankrupt until thankfully a right-wing, or at least an economic right-wing prime minister came around and said, wait a minute, you're all fucking idiots. The plants should be privatized because it's not never going to be efficient, and let the market follow its course. And what do you think? 10 years down the line, Germany is buying cars from here. And no tariffs, and the tariffs have all been abolished in the meantime. So every time this is tried, it ends in a disaster.
Because every time it has been tried before, two issues are getting confused. One is the manufacturing base, the location of the manufacturing. The second is ownership. Doesn't matter who owns it. Who cares? He's not, like, that doesn't matter. You don't use tariffs to protect a failing industry based on pride of ownerships. That's not what, to me, when I hear it, that is not what Trump is suggesting. He is suggesting that he's protecting the manufacturing location. It doesn't matter who owns it. If Nabisco wants to sell to China, let them do it, but they need to continue to produce and manufacture. And that's exactly what happened in the car industry in America as well, right? Detroit and the American auto manufacturers went crazy in the 70s because all of the smaller manufacturers, foreign manufacturers, were offering cars that had better gas mileage. American consumers loved them. We had Toyota, we had Hyundai, we had every single foreign car maker. What did the foreign car makers do to get around the tariffs? Begin locating their manufacturing facilities in the US. That's how you make the tariffs work. It compels, it incentivizes foreign-owned companies with better products, yes, it incentivizes them to locate their manufacturing in their marketplace. When I hear Donald Trump talk about tariffs, that's how I understand him using them.
Yes, but then
not
again,
in the punitive way that you described.
What you described, however, did not save the American auto industry. Detroit still went broke because, well, for many reasons. Part of it is democratic leadership. Part of it is, excessive unionization and so on. So yeah, it wasn't just that. And even with the bailouts, they still haven't been able to survive. So even that,
that doesn't matter. That's okay if the American auto industry fails. What's not okay is if all cars sold in the US are manufactured elsewhere. It's fine if all the car plants are owned by Hyundai, are owned by Honda, are owned by Nissan. The point is that the wages are being paid to the American people in their own marketplace, which allows them to buy the damn product in the first place. That's what I mean by the two issues getting confused. If you're putting in tariffs to save the failing American auto industry simply because it's American, yes, you're going to end up in situations like you described in the former communist countries. But if you are using tariffs to incentivize foreign companies to locate their manufacturing base inside the market to which they're selling to, that's a different story.
Yes, but now I do understand what you're saying. I still think you're completely wrong because let me explain. I mean, for instance, there have been recently a significant chunk of manufacturers who moved their plants out of China back in the United States, but in states that have either zero income tax, their right to work. I mean, every single corporate boss, every time it says, whenever they consider opening of a manufacturing plant in the US, they always say, we're only going to consider right to work states where union membership is not compulsory. If it's not a right to work state, we don't care what you have to offer. So it's really that simple. So there are different kinds of incentives, and even now without tariffs, there have been businesses that moved away from China or from Mexico back into the United States because of these incentives: local low taxes or no taxes locally, fewer amount of regulations and things of that nature. Those work far better because they enhance freedom for everyone rather than the tariffs, which they shrink the freedom of the consumers and they compel them to either buy more expensive or wait long periods of time until the manufacturer maybe or may not will respond to the incentive and open a manufacturing plant in the United States.
Okay, so we can disagree on what particular things work to incentivize the location of manufacturing in the US, and that's okay. Donald Trump is at least saying we have to incentivize this. Maybe he's wrong on tariffs, maybe he's right. The point is, his mindset is we need to incentivize manufacturing.
Well, the mindset and
and it's fine. You know what? I think he's going to figure it out. He's going to figure it out. He's the only one actually saying it, though. Everyone else, every other candidate is saying, no, just free trade. We don't care. We don't need to incentivize the location of manufacturing facilities in the US. Well, yes, you do. We can have a robust, energetic discussion on what you can do to incentivize that, but you need to do that. You have to. It's absolutely vital. And Trump's the only one talking about it.
True, but lowering taxes, lowering levels of regulation, that's incentivizing by enhancing free trade. Whereas through tariffs is sort of an incentivizing that you have to bet it will work. In most cases, it doesn't work, and it shrinks free trade. I mean, free trade and incentivizing businesses to come to your place, they're not incompatible. It's just that most politicians have this socialist mentality that they have to somehow force or compel rather than, using the stick rather than a carrot. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, let me ask you something, though. If you were going to talk to the American people and you wanted to have a discussion about how to incentivize manufacturing facilities back in the US, what is the one word you could use that everybody basically understands in principle, if not in depth? What's the one word you can use to say we're going to incentivize through a variety of measures businesses to come back? That word is tariff. Everybody knows what that is, what it means. If you're going to communicate to people that you intend to make incentivizing the location of manufacturing facilities in the US a priority, the best possible word you could use is tariff. It's entirely possible that Donald Trump is simply using that word as a communication strategy.
I understand. Well, and that comes from
he's a smart guy. He's a very
I never claimed that Donald Trump is an idiot. It's just an individual with whom I disagree severely on many issues, but I never claimed he's an idiot. And I guess that's an improvement. I mean, when we're looking at Bernie Sanders, I can understand why everyone likes Trump. So yeah, he's definitely not an idiot. Now, whether he'll actually deliver on his promises or not is a different question. All right, let's get to Trudeau, because we started on Trudeau and I abruptly interrupted it. What's the matter with that guy? I mean, I'm more frightened on international politics. I'm more frightened of Trudeau than I'm frightened of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump becoming president. I mean, Trudeau is promoting socially a message that is toxic. It really is. And he's promoting it here in Europe as well. He came on the Davos economic conference and promoted his social justice drivel. What the hell? Seriously?
He's political elite. So his father was former prime minister, very much loved. A lot of the affection transfers onto Justin. Justin got bullied a little bit just for being, the prime minister's son and thinking he's all that. And he's quite an attractive man. So he took up boxing, thinks he's a tough guy, has never actually faced any real opponents. He has an inflated sense of his own physicality. And of course, we're Canadians. We exist as a nation because the United States of America allows us to do that out of a very polite sense of whatever. Affection for us. We are not.
Also, Canada can afford its socialism because of American dollars paying for the defense, and thankfully for the Alaska purchase. I mean, if Canada had been the neighbor of Putin, I don't think there would have been so much fun over there.
I know nobody likes to talk about that. You see our little map of Canada, and then all of a sudden there's Alaska up there. It belongs to America. Gosh, that just doesn't seem right. That should be Canada's. No. That forces America to protect us. That was a very strategically brilliant decision on the part of our founding fathers. And yes, we can afford our nice social programs. We can afford to have completely fucking incompetent cabinet ministers just because they have the right genitals, because nothing we do really matters.
Because it's 2016, of course.
That's right, because it's 2016. I actually live in the exact same town in Canada, this little town in the middle of the boreal forest in northern Ontario. I live in the same town as the federal minister for women's status, and she will avoid me like the plague. If she knows I am going anywhere, she will not go there.
Excuse me for interrupting, but why the fuck would you have a federal minister for women's status?
I asked her that on Twitter.
I've never been able to understand that.
Yeah, there's no need to have a federal minister for the status of women. We are some of the most privileged women who have ever lived in the history of the entire planet. Only the royal families in history had a better life than even average Canadian women.
Not even those. I mean, the royal family of Great Britain of 90. I mean, Queen Victoria had a lower standard of living than the average North American today.
Absolutely.
It's really that simple. I mean, Queen Victoria didn't have warm water, hot water like that. It just didn't happen.
She had servants to make them do it. But aside,
yeah, but she still have to wait.
Yeah, true. Aside from extremely elite people in history, we are the most privileged, pampered group of women who have ever lived on this planet. And here you have hysterical feminists trying to whip up this frenzy about how we're oppressed. We are not oppressed in any way, shape, or form. What Justin Trudeau is doing, interestingly enough, is proving how incompetent women are by promoting them simply because they have a vagina. He's promoting them into positions they are not qualified to be in. They're not prepared to do the work that's involved. And he's just going to
misogyny of low expectations, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And it's the work-life balance. You know, I'm only going to dedicate 2 hours on Wednesday to my cabinet work. Well, you're going to fail then. You're going to fail badly. Yeah, and I'm just waiting for it.
Well, if you're the federal minister for women's status, I think you can do that. But if you're the minister of defense, I don't think you can do that.
Well, that's why all the important ministers are men.
Now, what I seem to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I seem to think is that the election of Justin Trudeau has incentivized the coming out of the woodwork of even more social justice warriors, even more left-wing fascists. I mean, I couldn't imagine, when I saw in 2012 that protest against Warren Farrell, I think it was in Toronto, University of Toronto, when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, this is probably the biggest thing that, and we're going to use it 5 years from now as an example and whatnot. And that happened. But in the meantime, we kind of became a bit desensitized. I mean, recently, piss was thrown on Lawrence Southern. That was unthinkable 4 years ago. And a lot of these things have become a little bit even more radical since Justin Trudeau and his 2015 campaign came out as the winner.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, Justin Trudeau just recently body checked Lawrence Southern too, out of the way, when she tried to ask him a question. I actually think that's hilarious. Here's Lawrence Southern. She's 20 years old, very smart, very attractive, very well put together young lady, trying to ask the Prime Minister, and he body checks her, rough handles her out of the way. Justin Trudeau, really? You're scared of a little 20-year-old girl? Are you serious? He's such a moral coward. He's such a moral coward. And again, it's just like Trump. The more that these social justice warriors get emboldened, the more brave they are at coming out and just openly stating their fascism, the more of a pushback there's going to be. Now, in the Canadian context, you're not going to see riots. You're not the only people who are willing to stamp their feet and scream and pull fire alarms are the social justice warrior types. That it takes
if there would be a Canadian riot, it would be something like take the social justice warrior, throw a punch into his face, and then say sorry.
Yes, exactly. Like we're not likely to do that. It'll be interesting to see what's going to happen on college campuses as they get more and more radicalized. What we do have is a sober judiciary here. So these idiots pull things into courts of law, at which point the sensible, sane patriarch comes in and just puts a stop to all of it. And that's a very typical Canadian solution to it, right? So you have the John Gomeshi trial, you have the Gregory Allen Elliott trial. The minute it gets into an actual system that men created and built, then sanity prevails. And that's the only hope.
But
that's the only hope we have for Canada.
But the social justice mentality has infected the judiciary as well. And, you know, the process is the punishment in a way. I mean, Gregory Allen Elliott was forbidden from the internet for a period of time. And yes, eventually he did came out he did come out as not guilty or as innocent, as it was expected by every sane person on the planet. But until that happened, until all the roles of justice have been put into motion, the process itself was the trial itself was the punishment.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a lot to push Canadians to react, but violence is the only truth. And the more the social justice warriors push, the closer they're going to get to it. And they're going to be reeling in shock when they elicit a violent reaction from people who are just sick of their shit. It's going to take a lot longer for that to happen in Canada. You know, in the community where I live, we don't have that kind of nonsense happening at our university up here. We don't have that kind of idiocy, because this is not a town where you're not going to have to push very hard to get a bunch of people from Thunder Bay to just kick your head in. So they don't have not the same level of nonsense. We've got lots of highly skilled hunters and survivalists, and this is a really different environment, really different area of Canada. We're much more rugged up here, but down in the city,
it's pretty much like in the States. Once you get further away from the coastlines, the amount of nonsense decreases radically. Same in Canada. Once you get further away from the border with the United States and further away from the big cities like Toronto or Ottawa, the level of nonsense drops dramatically, because reality kicks in, and you have to face nature. We don't have time for affirmative action here.
That's right. That is exactly right. It's like I say, there is no feminist. We had a blizzard this morning. There's 4 feet of snow in the driveway. You know who's out shoveling? There are no women out there shoveling. Bullshit. They're all inside making breakfast because they know their husbands or sons or whatever are going to come inside starving and hurting and aching after that. And it's pretty hard to convince me that sitting in here with my cup of coffee while all those guys shovel makes me the oppressed one. You can't. Just drop people into nature, and women realize that they are not oppressed. They are privileged. They are pampered. They are well taken care of. That men go to extraordinary lengths to do the hard work so we don't have to.
The same is true in almost every country of Europe. I mean, in Sweden, for instance, the highest amount of nonsense is in the further south, where it's warm, in Stockholm, in Malmö, even in Göteborg to a certain extent. But once you go further north in Sweden, again, the amount of Swedish nonsense is almost invisible. I mean, same in Norway. You have a lot of social justice stupidity in Oslo or in Trondheim. But once you go further north, let's say in Tromsø, close to the border with Russia in the far north, there is no feminist there. Recently in Sweden, there was a proposal to have gender equal plowing of snow. Guess who was willing to apply it? Well, exactly nobody, and especially not up north Sweden, where there's so much snow that I can hardly imagine there are more than 10 women in the entire Sweden being able to even begin to look at it, let alone start working on it.
Yeah, well, maybe an economic crash would be a disaster in many ways, but it would really restore that sense of reality to a lot of these women.
Maybe in Canada. In Sweden, I don't think so. They had an economic crash in 1992, and they came out even more social justice after it. So I'm not convinced. I think Sweden is just too far gone. But let's forget Sweden. One more question about Islam. Justin Trudeau seemed to be the most Islamic-friendly leader, well, outside of Angela Merkel, of course, in Europe and North America, in the Western world, so to speak. How's that going to fare out? I mean, this guy still has another 3 years ahead of his term.
Well, we don't have strict terms here. We can have a vote of non-confidence and fire the prime minister at any time.
That's
and
nice.
his playing with Islam, I think, is extremely dangerous, and that could earn him a vote of non-confidence. We haven't had a lot of overt terrorist activities here. We had a shooting in Calgary. We had, of course, the shooting in Ottawa. We've had a lot of honor killings, which is making Canadians very, very angry. He's bringing 25,000 Syrians. Here's my prediction, that as soon as the weather warms up around here and Canadians start to dress in what we consider absolutely normal, modest summer clothes, we're going to see the same kind of sexual assault and rape epidemic that's all over Europe, and Canadians aren't going to stand for it. It's not going to happen here. we don't have a big enough, we have a loud population of social justice warriors. We don't have a big enough one to actually shut down public response to the kind of sexual assaults that are going to happen. They are bringing 200 of these people to my city up here. A friend who works with my husband on a volunteer committee had gone to a spaghetti supper to raise money for these poor Syrian refugees.
Syrians,
Yeah, exactly.
refugees. Yeah.
Yeah, so I asked him, really, and how many of those refugees were military-aged males?
Usually 70% at least.
You know what? He didn't answer me. His face just looked absolutely blank. He had never considered that that would be an issue. And he just turned and walked away from me. The majority of refugees we're getting in this town where I live are military-aged males. And it's just not going to happen. I honestly don't think Canada is going to go into full apologia like Europe is doing over these fucking animals coming here.
Well, let's face it, it's only Germany that's left in the apologia. I mean, even Sweden has closed its borders, which I never thought it would be possible, but here you go,
Yeah.
the miracle happened. To be fair, it's not Europe, it's Germany. I mean, over here in Eastern Europe, everyone, and now including Austria, which used to be, Germany's best friend, even Austria built a fence, a wall, and said, well, if Germans want their refugees, they should bring them with their planes and keep them in there. We don't want them here. Get the fuck out.
Yeah. Isn't Sweden deporting 80,000 of the refugees?
There used to be, there is a discussion to deport 80,000 of them. Now, the problem is to select what 80,000 of them to deport. And even if that will come to fruition, which may happen, I'm not convinced it will happen, but it probably will happen. Even if that were to be the case, imagine that in November, September, October, November, even December, Sweden admitted 10,000 a week. 10,000 a week. So, deporting 80,000 of them, it's not going to make any difference. Sweden is already 25-30% completely Islamized, I would say. I mean, there are portions, last time I was in Malmö, I was like, what the hell? I thought this is Sweden. There are portions of the city that are not in Sweden, quite de facto. And you can see the border. That's where it ends. Here it ends Sweden, and from there on, it starts the caliphate. It's really that bad. But with the exception of Sweden and now Germany, because they have a very cucked leader, well, except for these two, everyone else is starting to wake up slowly. And they were like, wait a minute, this is just too much. And even in Germany, there were local elections last Sunday. And the so-called far right, well, they're essentially far right on economics, but on social issues they're very sensible. They were like, wait a minute, why do we have to bring in 1.5 million of them a year? And that political party just founded 3 years ago, pretty much swept. I mean, they've gone up from 1% polling to 25-26% in some regions. That's a political miracle by German standards.
Yeah, it is. And the combination of the sheer number that they've let in and the birth rate of these people, Europe has one generation to decide, and it's going to come to blood.
Yep. And again, it's not Europe, it's only certain countries in Europe. I mean, in Poland, for instance, Poland admitted like 100 of them. My country admitted 25 of them, and 5 of them already left on their own will because, it's not a very nice life once you're being, once you go out on the streets and everyone asks you, wait a minute, why the hell are you here? Do you want to work here? Do you want to learn our language? Do you want to learn our traditions? No, you don't? Then why the hell are you here? Exactly. And that kind of thing happens. It already started to happen, and it's only 25 of them. It's already too much. So in Eastern Europe, we're accustomed to repelling occupation, but then again, we had 800 years of learning that when fighting the Ottomans.
Yeah, you had some experience.
Yeah, well, Swedes had and Britons and Northern Germany had this privileged position of never having to fight actual barbarians. So, they don't have this historical experience. All right, one last question because we're already going over time. Will you come to London this July?
Yes, I'm going to be at the International Conference on Men's Issues. I'm actually one of the speakers. I'm going to be speaking about how feminism, which is supposed to empower women and, celebrate their strengths and make it easier for them to be strong, independent women, adults, in other words, actually does completely the opposite. That what it does is infantilize women and turn them into babbling toddlers. And that's the main thing that pisses me off about feminism is its refusal to accept that women are adults. And if women aren't adults, why the hell are we letting them vote?
Yeah, we should probably exchange notes before deciding upon our speeches. I'm going to speak about ideology at the International Conference on Men's Issues. To everyone else, if you want to see me and Janet, make sure to look for the ICMI 16 and buy your tickets because there are only a few of them left. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a blast in London. I mean, I can hardly wait to meet people with whom I've been working for years now.
Absolutely. And of course, Milo's going to be there. I have my dangerous faggot gear on.
Oh, absolutely, and he'll probably go. Probably going to promote Daddy, and also his fabulous hair. Let's not forget that. And of course, I think he already included his speech on ICMI 16 as part of his Dangerous Faggot tour.
Oh, excellent. Good. It's part of it. That's fantastic. And, shortly after, right around that conference, we should have some better information about when Cassie J's documentary, The Red Pill, is going to be premiering, that she'll be entering the final stretch of her post-production. And hopefully we'll be able to announce a date for that. This is very exciting. She wants that out before the election actually happens. So, and I can't wait to see her film.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that film as well. I'm already considering starting a local campaign in here to put it into the theaters of Budapest, of this city, of Bucharest, maybe in Ukraine as well, and probably Serbia. Yeah, it's going to be a blast on that. Also, the conference is right, I think it's a week or two after the British exit referendum, and I'm preparing an article right now why Brexit is good for men. I'm going to piss off everyone when I write that article because it's going to be on AVFM and it's going to be a blast. And we'll get to have that result by the time of the conference, which means I'll have to adjust my speech a little bit. Depending on the result, I really hope Brexit comes out as the winner. Because we really need to get rid of this European Union. It's not just bad because it brings us Islamists, but it's bad because it brings us feminism, and it brings feminism by force to everyone. The fishermen in Britain right now, as of, I think, if Britain stays in the EU by January 1st, 2017, fishermen will have to submit reports to Brussels on why they don't have 50% women on their boats. It's retarded. It's insane.
That's ridiculous. Okay, I'm really looking forward to reading that article then. Depending on how my Why Women Should Not Vote campaign, there's a few things happening in the background that are kind of interesting. If that takes off, then I might alter my speech to really explore the issue. I think I've got some very compelling arguments for why women should not be voting. And I think
imagine the face of the politically correct media that will come on ICMI when you go up on the podium. Let me tell you why women should not vote.
That almost is enough to motivate me to do it. I would love to see that.
It's going to be fun. All right. Thanks a lot, Janet. Again, sorry, Andrea. I cannot get myself to call you Andrea. I just can't. Thanks.
Okay. That's okay. I'm very comfortable with Janet, and my name's pronounced in the Eastern European tradition anyway.
Andrea.
My father was from, yeah, Andrea.
Okay. Thanks a lot again for coming. It's been quite an effort to get you on this show, and I really hope we can do this closer on to the conference. I mean, Janice Fiamengo also promised me that she'll come again to this show closer to the conference.
Awesome.
When we'll get our speeches together and, I don't know, maybe exchange notes. And we'll do it in public, the non-feminist way, because we don't hide, as opposed to the social justice warrior pussies. Yeah. So there's that. All right. Thanks again for coming to this show. Everyone else, stay tuned on this channel. Right after we finish this, we wrap this up, I'm going to publish a long expose, a video about why so many schools are trying to teach masturbation to 3-year-olds. It's a directive from the World Health Organization. I'm not joking. Just stick around on this channel because I'm going to publish that soon, in maybe 30 minutes from now. And also on Sunday on the psychology of former leftists. And with that being said, thanks again, Janet, for coming to this show, and thanks everyone
Thank you
for
for having
watching.
me.
Right, goodbye.